If you're an American, you should feel shame that your elected officials are proposing that this is the bill that gets passed, that we vaporize this much money, that we put ourselves this much further in debt, that we do not treat this situation as the fiscal emergency that it is. The bill ultimately yields no real change in the annual deficit. The annual deficit could climb to $2.5 trillion being added to the federal debt load every single year going forward. In fact, if you look at the Treasury yields, the 30-year is now kissing 5%. So the United States has called $37 trillion of debt. At 5%, we're paying close to $2 trillion a year just in interest on our debt as this debt gets refinanced.
Freeberg, do us a favor for the audience if you could explain why it's going up, why it's so high, and what that means.
Why? What's so high? The debt or the interest rates?
The interest rates, yeah.
Well, the interest rates are going up because the probability that the U.S. will default on its debt payments, which is what you're buying when you buy U.S. treasuries, you're getting the U.S. government to pay you some number of dollars with interest over time. And the market is now demanding that that interest rate be as high as 5% because of this fiscal situation that the United States finds itself in. We are now burning an additional $2.5 trillion a year, adding to our debt load. We are in a fiscal crisis and we're not willing to admit it. And I've said this from day one, that DOGE can only do so much. And clearly that's the case where they're now talking about sub $300 billion a year in potential annual savings from DOGE action. At the end of the day, Congress needs to take action. And this bill from Congress doesn't take much action. I will tell you that if you look across the board, all of these programs are still being proposed to be run at a cost that is well in excess of their pre-COVID levels. And so I would set two guiding principles. If I was to be the benevolent dictator of the United States of America, my guiding principle number one would be that any program that we intend to continue to persist have its budget level cut to pre-COVID, to 2019 levels. Second would be, and if we did that, by the way, we would be in a much better fiscal situation. The second would be that we add no new programs in the moment. There's a whole bunch of new shit thrown into this bill, as well as increasing the cost and a few cuts here and there. I'll just highlight a couple that I think are worth noting. You know, there's a cut in the SNAP program, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's food stamps. And I talked about this with Brooke Rollins in the interview I did a few weeks ago. You can watch it on YouTube. And we talked a little bit about how this SNAP program has absolutely exploded in size from $60 billion a year in 2019 to $120 billion a year today. So in this budget proposal, they're actually cutting it back by about $30 billion, so to $90 billion. So it's still 50% higher than it was pre-COVID.